Chapter 1. The young girl ran through the knee-deep snow, her breath escaping in ragged gasps, leaving a trail of thin white clouds that hung in the air. She could hear the sounds of pursuit all too close behind her, the barks and snarls of dogs and the coarse shouts of the men who followed them. She could hardly feel her bare feet and lower legs any more as she plunged on through the deep icy powder, the dark ancient trees of the forest surrounding her in all directions. She wore nothing but a tattered dark blue dress made of rough material that offered little protection from the biting cold. As she ran over the crest of a small hill, the girl tripped on a rock concealed beneath the blanket of snow and fell, tumbling down the slope. Staggering to her feet, she spotted the vague outline of a cottage, its dark walls half buried beneath deep white drifts. She stumbled toward it, desperately rattling the handle of its only door. It was locked. The girl gritted her teeth and kicked the wooden door hard, ignoring the pain in her foot. The door refused to budge. She cursed under her breath and kicked again, harder. The ancient lock gave way, and as the door flew inward, the girl half staggered, half fell inside. She quickly shut the door behind her and looked around the darkened room. It was obviously a hunting lodge. Stuffed animal heads were mounted on the walls, and animal skins were scattered on the floor and chairs, but there were no signs of life. Everything was covered by a thick layer of dust, which the girl disturbed as she frantically searched the ground floor for anything she could use as a weapon. Outside, several men in heavy cold winter outfits ran toward the cottage, led by the vicious snarling dogs straining at the leashes they held. "The trail ends here," the first man said in Russian. "She's inside." "Go get her," said the tall man at the rear of the group. The men on either side of him unslung the rifles that hung across their backs and headed toward the house. They pushed the door open and cautiously entered. Seconds later, a single shot rang out from somewhere inside the cottage. Then silence returned to the snow-covered forest. "Vasily? Gregor?" the tall man called out, but there was no reply. "Send the dogs in," he said with a frown. Two large, heavily muscled dogs sprinted across the snow and into the cottage. There was sudden noisy barking, and then a quick panicked whimpering sound before silence descended once again. "What should we do, Mr. Furan?" one of the dog handlers asked, staring at the darkened windows of the cottage. "Wait here," the tall man replied, and pulled a handgun from his belt. He walked toward the house and went inside. "How old is she?" the first dog handler asked. "I don't know," the other man replied. 10, 11 years old, maybe? "She's not going to make it to 12 if Furan has anything to say about it." Suddenly there was a pained yell from inside the house, and one of the windows shattered, exploding outward in a shower of glass as a wooden stool flew through it. The girl dived out through the jagged hole and rolled to her feet, sprinting off through the snow, darting between the trees. Furan staggered out of the cottage, blood streaming from under the hand clutched to his right eye. He raised the pistol and took careful aim at the fleeing girl. He squeezed the trigger, the shot seeming unusually loud in the quiet of the snowy forest. The girl spun, the bullet struck her in her shoulder, and she collapsed into the snow. She tried to struggle to her feet, but Furan was already on her, pistol-whipping her to the ground, knocking her out cold. Furan stared down at the unconscious body of the pale, dark-haired girl with his one good eye. The fresh blood stained the snow crimson beneath her shoulder. Her breathing was labored. He raised the pistol, pointing it at her head. He stood there for a moment, blood dripping from his ruined eye, seemingly unsure whether or not to pull the trigger, before he slowly lowered the weapon. "No, Natalia," he said, his voice cold and hard. "That would be too easy. Rest assured, though, you won't escape again. This will be your last flight, my little raven." 20 years later. State Trooper Sam Fletcher was having a bad night. He knew he'd drawn the short straw when he'd been dispatched to the old gas station on the desert road. Mrs. Trenton had called to complain, as she did at least 3 or 4 times every month, that she was being harassed again by mysterious flying objects and lights in the sky. Sam had known it would be a waste of time, but the sheriff had insisted that he go and check on the batty old woman. She'd been all alone since her husband had passed away recently, and the sheriff was a friend of the family, which explained why Sam had ended up being sent out there at this time of night. He'd sat in the old woman's front room while she went on about the strange noises she kept hearing and the lights she kept seeing in the sky. On that particular evening, she complained that something had flown low right over the house and scared the living daylights out of her as she'd been feeding her chickens in the backyard. Sam had dutifully listened to her ramble on and had eventually left, promising her that he would look into it and see if the local U.S. Air Force Base knew anything about the mysterious aircraft. It would be a futile task. In this part of Nevada, there were no strangers to unusual aerial activity, but the kinds of aircraft that were being tested around those parts were not the sort that the Air Force would be prepared to discuss with someone like Sam. Chances were that some bored fighter jockey had buzzed the Trenton place at a lower altitude than was technically permitted, just to liven up a test flight. It wouldn't be the first time something like that had happened, and he was fairly sure that it wouldn't be the last. With a weary sigh, he reached for the radio on the dashboard and spoke into the headset. "Dispatch, this is Car 4. Come in. Over," he said. "Hey, Sam, you rounded up those little green men that have been spooking Clara yet?" the voice at the other end asked. "Yeah, I got myself 3 genuine extraterrestrials cuffed in the back of my car right now, Maggie," he replied. "Matter of fact, Whoa!" The trooper jerked the steering wheel hard to the left, as his headlights suddenly illuminated a disheveled figure running straight down the middle of the road toward him. The car's tires screeched in protest, and he dropped the radio handset, both of his hands flying to the wheel as he fought to control the wildly fishtailing patrol car. Cursing under his breath, he brought the car to a shuddering halt on the side of the road. He stopped for a moment to gather himself and let out a long, deep breath before grabbing his flashlight and stepping out of the car. The powerful beam of the torch lit up the man who Sam had just narrowly avoided running over as he staggered toward the car. "Sir, please, stay right there," Sam shouted, his other hand resting on the holstered pistol on his hip. "You know how close I came to hitting you? Care to explain what you're doing, running down the middle of the road way out here at this time of night?" "Please, you have to help me," the man said. Sam couldn't quite place his accent, but it sounded European. "They're out there. They're after me. They could be here any minute." Sam's first instinct had been that he was dealing with some drunken bum who'd somehow got stranded in the middle of nowhere, but there was something strange about this man. His face was covered in desert dust, but he was clean-shaven and his hair was neatly trimmed. His clothes were also covered in dirt, but the suit he was wearing was well cut, and his shoes were expensive. In fact, the more that Sam looked at him, the less he seemed like someone that you'd expect to find wandering around in the desert 20 miles from the nearest town. "Who's after you?" Sam asked, walking slowly toward the man. "The disciples," the man said, his eyes filled with fear. "I know what they're planning. We have to stop them. The government must be warned." Okay, not a drunk, but a religious nut, Sam thought to himself. "What's your name, sir?" Sam asked. "Tobias Schechter," the man replied, looking nervously up at the sky. "Okay, Mr. Schechter, can you tell me what exactly you're doing out here on your own at this time of night?" "I'm a geologist," Schechter replied. "I have been working for some men, doing calculations just theoretical, or at least I thought so. Oh, God. I have to get to a phone," he continued frantically, "or a radio. Let me use your radio." "Just calm down, sir," Sam replied. "Let's take you back to town and see if we can't sort all this out." "You don't understand. There's no time," the man yelled, lunging toward him. Sam stepped to one side and used the man's own momentum against him, just as he'd been trained to do, forcing the struggling figure to the ground and reaching for the cuffs clipped to the back of his belt. "I'm afraid you just earned yourself a night in one of our holding cells," he said, snapping the cuffs closed on the man's wrists. He dragged the stranger to his feet and quickly bundled him into the back of the car, then climbed into the driver's seat. The man in the back was muttering to himself in a foreign language that Sam didn't recognize. He started the car and set off down the road toward the town with a sigh. This night was just getting better all the time. "Do we have him?" the voice asked over the loudspeaker mounted in the center of the central console. Yes, we have a biometric match, but he appears to have made contact with a local police officer, the thin man seated at the console replied. He pushed at the joystick he held in one hand, and the grainy image of the police cruiser on the road below sharpened as the camera zoomed in. What are your orders? Terminate him immediately, the voice replied. He knows too much. Very well, the thin man replied. He pressed a button on the console, and the car was highlighted by a green box. Then he lifted the transparent plastic guard that covered a large red switch that was labeled with a single word, Commit. Do svidaniya, comrade, the man at the console said with a small, sadistic smile. High above the Nevada desert, the sleek black unmanned drone banked toward its target. The heat from the car's engine far below gave the onboard computers a perfect infrared target against the cold expanse of the desert surrounding it. The spherical unit mounted under the drone's nose rotated and painted the target with an invisible beam of laser light, as a hatch slid open in the aircraft's belly and a missile dropped down and locked into place. Moments later, the missile detached from the drone and fell away, its rocket motor igniting only when it was several yards below the launch platform. The inertial guidance system steered it flawlessly along the invisible laser beam that the drone was projecting, and mere seconds later it speared into the roof of the police car, the 8-pound shaped charge in its nose detonating and consuming the vehicle in a ball of fire. Blazing fragments scattered across the road, pieces tumbling across the cold desert floor and igniting the coarse scrub that dotted the barren landscape. As silence returned to the desert, a burning debris field was the only sign of the two men's futures that had just been snuffed out, and the secret that had cost them both of their lives. Who is she? Otto asked quietly, looking down at the girl sitting alone on one of the sofas in the atrium of their accommodation block. I am not sure, Wing replied. All I have heard is that she is joining the Alpha Stream. Otto already knew that much, but as far as he was able to determine, that in itself was extremely unusual. New Alphas were inducted annually into the first year. They were never admitted into a more senior year. Not before now, at least. Clearly there was something about this girl that was special, and Otto was determined to find out what. Perhaps the girls will know more, Wing said with a nod, toward Laura and Shelby, who were approaching from the other end of the new hall. Stalking the new girl, Malpens? Shelby said, jabbing him in the ribs with her finger. You do know how creepy that is, don't you? It's not stalking, Otto replied. It's surveillance. Just getting creepier, Shelby said with a mock shudder. Has anyone actually gone and spoken to the poor girl yet? Laura said, sounding slightly cross. I don't suppose anyone stopped to think about what it was like for us on our first day here. At least when we were all newbies together. Just try and imagine what this must be like for her all on her own. Shelby and I are going to go and say hello. You coming? Okay, Otto said, holding up his hands. Let's go and roll out the HIVE welcome wagon. There's a wagon of some kind? Wing asked, looking confused. Come on, big guy, Shelby said with a grin. She pushed Wing ahead of her down the hallway toward the stairs. We could always see what information the central server has on her, Otto said, still looking down at the girl. That's if you fancied having a poke around. I hardly think you need my help with that, Laura said, pulling Otto away from the balcony. Nah, I'm trying to lay off the out-of-body experiences at the moment, Otto said, sounding distracted. In recent months, Otto had discovered that he had a unique ability to interface remotely with electronic devices or data networks. In theory, it made him the most efficient hacker on the planet, but the reality was more worrying. More than once he had almost lost himself within the electronic world, which had left him feeling slightly unsure about the actual benefits of his skill. Number 1 and Sebastian Trent had both sought to reverse the connection in order to control Otto, and both had very nearly succeeded. Now he found himself increasingly wary of allowing anyone else the chance to exert a similar influence over him. Besides, you're a natural, Otto said. Laura had been inducted into HIVE after hacking into the U.S. government's early warning system, just so that she could use its resources to listen in on the mobile phone conversations of girls who had been picking on her at her previous school. It may not be that easy, actually, Laura said with a frown. Professor Pike has beefed up a lot of the network security since HiveMind, well, you know. HiveMind, the artificial intelligence that had been in charge of HIVE's computer systems, had sacrificed himself to help defeat Overlord and to save Otto's life. It was still something that Otto did not really want to think about. "You mean it might actually be easier to just talk to her then?" Otto said with a grin. "Shocking, I know," Laura replied, "but sometimes the old ways are the best." They headed quickly down the stairs and caught up with Wing and Shelby as they crossed the atrium toward where the girl was sitting. She looked up from her binder as the four of them approached. Her long, straight, jet-black hair contrasted sharply with her pale skin and deep blue eyes. There was no doubt that she was pretty, but there was something else that Otto felt when he saw her, a certain familiarity. "Hi, I'm Shelby, and this big hunk is Wing," Shelby said with a grin. "And these are our two resident brainiacs, Laura and Otto. We thought you might need someone to show you around. My guess is, if you're feeling anything like I did on the day we arrived, then you've got about 1,000,000 questions and not many answers, right?" "It is a little overwhelming," the girl replied with a shy smile. "My name's Lucy Dexter." "It is an honor to make your acquaintance, Miss Dexter," Wing said, giving a short bow. "I think he means hi," Otto said with a grin and nudged Wing. "Indeed, hi," Wing said, raising one eyebrow. "So, what do you think of the old place?" Laura asked, gesturing vaguely at the walls surrounding them. Well, I suppose the word is unbelievable," Lucy replied. She sounded slightly shell-shocked. "A secret school for the supervillains of the future, hidden inside a volcano on a remote tropical island? What's so hard to believe about that?" Otto grinned. "Aye, sounds perfectly normal to me, which is, deeply troubling whichever way you look at it," Laura added. Lucy laughed and gestured toward the folder she'd been flicking through. "I've been given the tour, and I'm working my way through the induction manual that they gave me, but, to be honest with you, I'm not even really sure why I'm here. One minute I was at home reading in bed, and the next thing I knew I was waking up on board a helicopter with some crazy Russian woman." "Oh, don't worry, we're familiar with that crazy Russian woman," Otto laughed. "One piece of advice, though, I wouldn't call her that to her face." "Not if you're a fan of the whole not eating out of a straw thing, anyway," Shelby said, grinning. "I do not believe that Raven would ever assault a student without good reason," Wing said with a frown. "I know, I was just exaggerating, because... Funny? Never mind," Shelby said with a sigh. Otto tried very hard not to laugh. "Is it true that you don't get to leave here until you're really finished all 6 years?" Lucy asked. "Have you guys really not been off the island since you arrived?" "Well, technically that's true," Laura said, sitting down on the sofa opposite. "But we've had a couple of unofficial excursions in that time, and there's the occasional training mission that's taken us off the island. In fact, there's one in a couple of days, so you won't have to wait too long before you see the outside world again. Admittedly, it's an Arctic survival course, so the outside world will mainly consist of endless fields of snow and ice, but still, it's a change of scene at least. Anyway, we always seem to end up back here, one way or another." "Why, you're not thinking about leaving us already, are you?" "No," Lucy replied quickly, looking slightly nervous. "It's not that. It's just that, well, doesn't this place sometimes feel a bit like a prison?" She looked at each of them in turn. "I suppose it did once," Otto replied, "but after a while it started to feel like home. Some of us don't really have very much to go back to in the outside world. Besides which, this lot would be completely lost without me." Otto grinned. "Oh, aye," Laura said, rolling her eyes. "I, for one, don't know what I'd do without you putting all of our lives in danger at least once every few months." "Nothing worse than a nice quiet life with no one shooting at you," Shelby said, flopping down on the sofa next to Laura. "What would we do without bullet magnet malpens?" "Hey, that's not fair," Otto said, sounding hurt. "Sometimes it's knives, or even bombs." "Sounds like you have a lot of interesting years," Lucy said, looking worried. "Welcome to Hive," Wing replied with only the hint of a smile. Chapter 2. Dr. Nero sat down at the conference table in his appointed seat and waited patiently as the dome in the center of his table lit up with a soft white light. Suddenly, other figures materialized out of thin air, seated in other chairs around the table, some already engaged in conversation. These new holographic telepresence meetings were one of the few first innovations that Diabolus Darkdoom had introduced when he had taken command of GLOVE, the Global League of Villainous Enterprises. It made a certain amount of sense, Nero supposed. avoiding as it did all of the risks associated with assembling the ruling council in one location, but he still couldn't help but feel that there was something missing. There had been a definite value to sitting in the same room as his fellow glove commanders, risky as it may have been. It was, after all, much harder to tell when a holographic projection was lying, when you were seated opposite that person in the same room and could see the beads of sweat forming on their forehead. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen." The figure of Diabolus Darkdoom, the commander of Glove, materialized at the head of the table, immediately to Nero's left. "I'm glad you were all able to attend this meeting at such short notice. A matter has arisen that requires urgent discussion. You will have noticed, no doubt, that there is an empty seat at the table today, and it is the fact that this seat is unoccupied that has forced me to call us all together. Jason Drake has chosen to boycott this meeting for reasons that are not yet entirely clear. I'm well aware that he has expressed discontent with my leadership, but it would seem that he has now decided that he no longer wishes to be a part of our organization. Glove has never tolerated the existence of factions or splinter groups that may compete with our goals, and I do not intend to make an exception here. What I need to know now is whether any of you are aware of Drake's intentions. If he is working to establish his own organization, then I must know now so that we can take appropriate measures." Diabolus looked around the table at each of the remaining council members, but no one appeared to be willing or able to give any further information. Nero found himself once again cursing the fact that the low resolution of the holographic projections around the table made it difficult, if not impossible, to see the tiny clues of expression or body language that might have revealed which of them knew more than they were prepared to say. "Very well," Diabolus said firmly. "If Drake is needed and planning to set up a new organization, it may be that he will approach some of you for support. I'm sure I do not need to explain to any of you what the consequence would be if I were to find out that you were secretly conspiring with him." "What makes you so sure he's gone rogue?" Carlos Chavez, chief of the Glove's South American operations, asked. "I have, or should I say had, sources close to Drake," Darkdoom replied. "Those sources have fallen silent, but not before they informed me that some form of operation was being planned, and that this organization was the target." "Do we know where he intends to strike?" Madame Mortis asked. "No, we do not," Darkdoom replied, "so I suggest all of you increase your levels of security. Any activities that you have scheduled could be jeopardized, so you may want to delay or cancel them. I'll leave it to your discretion." "He's a public figure, the head of a multinational corporation," Baron von Sturm said. "He can't disappear forever." "Oh, I have no doubt he will resurface," Darkdoom said, "and when he does, Dr. Nero will be asking Raven to have a little chat with him, won't you, Max?" "Of course," Nero nodded. He was pleased to see the slightly nervous expressions on the other faces at the table. Raven was his most trusted operative, and also the world's most feared assassin. Nobody at this meeting ever wanted to find themselves at the top of her to-do list. "Now, I'm certain that we all have other things we need to attend to, so I won't keep you any longer. Needless to say, if any of you hears anything, I expect you to inform me immediately. Understood?" The other heads of global villainy gathered around the table nodded. "Very good," Darkdoom said. "Do unto others." "Do unto others," the members of the council said, repeating Glove's motto, and one by one the projected images of the council members around the table flickered and vanished, until only Nero and Darkdoom remained. "You have something to add, Max?" Darkdoom said, looking irritated. "You realize how dangerous this could be, I assume?" Nero asked calmly. "Of course I do," Darkdoom snapped, before taking a deep breath and slumping back in his chair. "I'm sorry, Max, this situation has rather caught me by surprise." "You knew he was unhappy," Nero said. "We all did. There was always going to be those who were unhappy with your appointment as head of the council. Number 1 may have sought to betray us all, but it didn't mean that everyone disagreed with the way he ran Glove. Drake wanted the seat that you're sitting in for himself, and he was never going to be content to just take orders from you. We all knew that." "Maybe, but he was one of the most powerful members of the ruling council in terms of manpower and resources. To lose him now while we're still vulnerable." Nero understood what Darkdoom meant. It was not easy to satisfy the technological requirements of an organization like Glove without having existing legitimate production facilities that could be discreetly used to manufacture the equipment they needed. Jason Drake was the head of Drake Industries, and had been responsible for developing much of the advanced technology that Glove used on a daily basis. To lose access to the resources he had at his disposal had the potential to be catastrophic in itself, quite aside from any other plans Drake might have to cause harm to the organization. "Glove will endure, it always has," Nero said reassuringly. "We just have to make sure this situation doesn't devolve into civil war. If I know Drake, his first course of action will be to recruit the remaining members of the council, or turn them against one another, assuming, of course, that he hasn't already." "You think that we may have traitors in our midst?" Darkdoom asked, gesturing at the empty seats around the table. "No member of this council got where they are today by using honor and fair play, us included, so we shouldn't be surprised if they are trying to work out how they might best profit from this situation. We just need to make sure we stay one step ahead of the game." Darkdoom nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Max. I can always rely on you to watch my back, at least." "Trust is everything now," Nero replied, looking Darkdoom straight in the eye. "This is going to get worse before it gets better. That much, at least, we can be certain of. Drake wouldn't have taken a step like this unless he had some reason to feel secure from Glove's wrath. Von Sturm was right. He's too public a figure to just disappear. He knows he'll have to come back up for air, but I fear that means that whatever he has planned is designed to remove us as a threat to him before he does." Darkdoom let out a long sigh and rubbed at his temples with both hands. "You know, in all my years of hiding, I had forgotten what sitting at this table was like," he said, sounding tired. "Number 1 made it look easy." "Number 1 was a psychopathic artificial intelligence," Nero said. "I don't think there was very much to admire about him." "Not always, Max," Darkdoom said. "He started out as human as you or me. We should not forget that he achieved before Overlord corrupted him. He founded this organization, and he kept it from imploding against all the odds for many years. I don't think I'd really appreciated how difficult that must have been until now. Sometimes I wonder if it wouldn't have just been easier to stay dead." "Be careful what you wish for," Nero said with a crooked smile. Darkdoom laughed and leaned his head back against the headrest of his seat. "Actually, there was something else I wanted to discuss with you, which is vaguely connected to Drake. The Dreadnought has finished its shakedown mission and is ready for full deployment. I wondered if you'd like to come and take a tour." "You and your toys," Nero said with mock exasperation. The fact of the matter was that the construction of the Dreadnought had been one of the final projects that Drake Industries had completed for Glove. "The Dreadnought isn't a toy, it's one of the most sophisticated vehicles ever built, and a vital part of the future of this organization." "Of course it is," Nero said with a sigh. "Besides which, I think we should meet face to face to discuss those recent developments in greater detail." "Agreed," Darkdoom said, nodding. "Send me the Dreadnought's coordinates, and I'll arrange transport." "Excellent. See you soon."